Hey, so I made some lifestyle choices that allowed me to adjust my time in order to make more time to make my game. And I actually ended up making DodgeKing in 3 months. So I'm going to share some tips that I took in order to be very efficient when making your game. So let's go ahead and get that started. But before we begin, let's go ahead and ask this important question that you probably have. Why is this important? And the truth is, making games does take time. It's a challenge. There's going to be obstacles that we're going to have left and right. And I remember when I was working on my first game, it took over a year, and there was a point where I had to stop. And I was like, this is taking too much time. What can I do to optimize? Right. Then I ended up doing a couple of things that drastically changed my productivity. And this is how I was able to make DodgeKing within 3 months. So I've organized a couple of things that we can talk about here, but I've categorized it in three parts. The personal part, where it's applicable for pretty much anything. Development decisions are going to be more focused on what you as a game developer should do, and then the mindset framework, which is how we should be thinking about these problems. So, first of all, you need to set an alarm to go to bed. Okay. Rest is critical. It is super important. You need to be really well rested to handle any type of challenge during the day. Right. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have is we have alarm clocks that go out in the morning. And the issue with that is that we end up interrupting our own sleep. And the consequence for that is that we end up feeling more tired, less rested, and we're just not going to be as efficient as possible. The crazy part is, as humans, we have an internal clock. So, that being said, if we kind of went backwards and just set an alarm to go to bed consistently, let's say something like 10 p.m., then you can go ahead and, go to bed, shut down everything, get rest. And then when you wake up naturally in the morning, if you wake up really early, you have extra time. And if you don't, guess what? You're well rested and you will still be efficient during the day. So it's really important to set an alarm to go to bed, not one to get you out of bed. All right. That's number one. The next one is meal prep. If you are a person that cooks, if you're a person that eats a lot inside, it is super critical that you should consider meal prepping. And the reason why I say this is because it probably takes 20 minutes to half an hour to make a meal. And then, you eat the meal, take some time to digest, whatever, and you're like, okay, you move on. The thing is, every single time you're cooking a meal, that's 30 minutes of preparation time to get everything set, right? Now, it depends on the actual meal itself. But if you can take an extra 10 minutes, right? Let's say we take 40 minutes to cook some rice and chicken and beans and everything. And, suddenly we have more chicken, more rice, more everything. And then we divide that for the week. Well, guess what? All you have to do is reheat your food, whether it's on a stove or a microwave. And suddenly you just saved 30 minutes of cooking for, during the week. So super, super simple hack, but you should genuinely consider doing meal prep since it actually saves you a lot of time. And I would also suggest that, we have chores to do. And I would say if you can do all of your chores in one sitting, then that would be really good because that way you're not spreading out those tasks during the day. So if you overload that with, cleaning up, doing your laundry, doing your groceries, cooking, that's something that can really give you more time to focus on larger chunks during your day, right? Now, there are exceptions, right? Let's say you have a pet or you have a family member that you have to take care of, or maybe obligations, right? And it's pretty common that most of us work or we're at school or we're trying to, you know, make extra time for a reason, right? So, just make sure that these are small things you can do to just keep gaining those increments of extra minutes, extra hours that actually play a big role later, right? And then I'm going to talk about working out, right? Exercise is critical, and I don't want to hear an excuse of you saying, oh, I don't need to work out, I don't need to do this. No, no, no. You need proper nutrition, you need to exercise, you really need to move your body. Now, my controversial opinion or something that I think is important is if you are going to work out, you shouldn't work out for like 3+ hours, right? Now, if you're doing a cardio day that requires you to do half an hour or a whole hour, go for it. If you're going to do your arms, your legs, any part of your body, do what you have to do. But the key here is to be efficient at it, right? Sometimes there are people that, they go to the gym and they're just kind of on the treadmill all day. And that's great for them. I don't have an issue with that. But what I'm saying is if you want to create more time as a developer or just somebody doing their project, you should really consider doing efficient workouts so that you can minimize the time in the gym or working out and then, still hitting the areas that you want to hit. All right. And then another extremely powerful tool is saying no, right? And you might get called out for it, but I'm going to talk about this for a little bit because if you say no to the new ideas, to going out, to distractions, to any opportunity that halts you, you're indirectly creating more time to say yes to the thing that actually matters the most. So you should really, really pay attention to, your environment. Like, are you in a position where you are required to go out often? Are there people that are, kind of like bugging you daily, like, hey, like I want to do this with you, and you kind of have to like be defensive about it? Or simply, maybe you have a lot of ideas that you want to commit to, but I recommend you not doing that. Just say no to the things that don't matter and then say yes to what actually matters. And then I have two little tips for you, because I understand that saying no might be very difficult to, a people pleaser, right? If you're a people pleaser, then, you might feel guilty. You might feel a little awkward about, like, do I have to reject, right? So the two things to keep in mind. One, when you say no, try not to add any more excuses. And the reason why I say this is because if you're in a conversation with somebody who's very dominant in what they want, they will try to take your excuses and then fold it against you to the point where you change your no to a yes, right? So it's just better to say no, stand firm on it. Don't necessarily bring up excuses and just see what happens, because from there, you're not creating the area of space for the other person to attack you and, change your answer. And number two, by you saying no, you're actually doing yourself and the person requesting you a favor. One, you're saving yourself time for yourself to do your project, to do what you have to do. But also, let's say you did say yes, like you said no, then you changed to yes. The request that you will be performing, you may do it half-heartedly, right? You might do it with a little bit of like grudgedness. You might be like, maybe I shouldn't have done this. And as a result, you may not be fulfilling the person's request to their fullest. So really just pay attention to what really matters and focus on that. And that just means saying no to a lot of things. And then, if possible, you should really go autopilot on your decisions. Now, I'm not saying autopilot is the way you should live your life. I genuinely think living in the present is amazing, that there's a lot of things to observe and such. However, what I want to point out is routines are established for a reason, right? When you have a routine, you're basically doing tasks automatically. So if everything that I've described to you so far is not in your routine, go ahead and try thinking about, okay, what can I do to get in the habit of doing that, so that in my daily day-to-day tasks, I have that ready and I kind of just automatically do it, right? And this will automatically help you optimize more free time for you to use what you need to do. And then we have distractions. And I'm especially pointing out social media, because as developers, we actually should be marketing on social media pretty often. But sometimes that bleeds into, sending memes and staying on social media for a while. So there's a bunch of things that we have to be a little bit careful about. But yeah, I would say, be aware of social media. If you are a person that takes a lot of phone calls, either keep it short or simply delegate it or leave it for another time later when you're done with your current work. If you get invited to go out a lot, that's absolutely cool, good for you. But try to keep that at a minimum, because going out requires you to get ready, then to drive, then to go, and those are hours that you could be using. And then, of course, if you're somebody that watches like movies or anime or something on Netflix, there's a space and time for that, but you don't want to overdo it either. And so, of course, I'm not saying take this at an extreme level, because of course there's going to be emergencies, there's going to be situations in life that happens, and it's super important to focus on that, right? But if you can mitigate all of these distractions, if you can really stop being distracted by the daily norms that occur, then you will suddenly realize, wait, if I don't go on social media for multiple hours, maybe I can do this, right? So like avoid doom scrolling. And obviously there's other things you can do, such as setting alarms, setting timers, setting limits, so that you can continue avoiding these distractions. But I simply recommend you getting in the habit of just mentally not distracting yourself, because it is a skill to like be focused. So the more you work on that, the more likely you're going to keep getting focused, and as a result, you will still make more time for yourself. The next point that I want to bring is actually making shorter breaks, right? And like I said, breaks are important. You are human. You're going to need rest. You're going to need your time to do your things. That's absolutely fair and valid. What I'm saying is, don't say, oh, I'm going to take a break, and then you disappear forever, right? So sometimes you might, take a break super late at night, and then then you get hit with that, okay, I'm really tired. Maybe let me stay on my phone for a little bit longer. Maybe let me continue this conversation a little bit longer. And suddenly you're just losing time by doing that. So try to keep in mind that you can take a break. There's no issues with that. But try to keep it short so that you can continue going back into the flow of things that you need to work on. And yeah, just really pay attention to that, because sometimes we autopilot on the break. So if we're on the break and then we're like really enjoying the break and then we're still on autopilot in the break, you know, we're probably going to waste more time than you think. And the hack of all time, and this is such an underrated one that I genuinely believe in, is you need to use Parkinson's Law, right? So Parkinson's Law states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. What that means is if I say, I need this game to be done in a month from now, all the work I would need to do in that month suddenly gets compressed in that month so that by the end of the month, my game is complete. The same way, if I said, I need my game to be completed in 6 months, well, guess what? The exact same of work that I would do in the month suddenly expands to 6 months. So by the time the 6 months are over, assuming that I'm following the deadline, I'm going to finish the game in 6 months. So it is important to have realistic goals of your deadlines, and things happen. Like, you might say, hey, I'm going to get this done in 2 months, and then something pops up and then it happens. That's fine. But really practice and really get in the habit of using Parkinson's Law. Try to make really tight deadlines. And while you're practicing all of these extra habits to build your, um, free time, suddenly you're going to see, wait a minute, maybe this is possible. So really keep that in mind. All right. Now, we're going to get into the development decisions. And what this basically means is I'm going to start talking more about what you can do as a game developer to optimize your productivity in game, right? Number one, you can only do one project at a time. Do not overcommit to multiple ideas. Don't say, I'm going to do this prototype, then I'm going to go back and forth. No. If you've ever wondered how to get multiple projects done, it's simply by grabbing one, completing it, and then moving on to the next one. So before I went into game development, I was actually an author, right? So I wrote a book, and then I wanted to do a revision of the book, and then I did a small little webcomic series, and then I said, okay, I want to get into game dev. Imagine what would happen if I was doing game dev, and then I was also balancing the book at the same time. Suddenly, I'd be going back and forth with the narrative, I'd be switching my mindset, my flows, and I just wouldn't achieve the productivity that I could. So you really need to focus on one at a time. And I know it's so easy to say, I have this new idea, I want to try this out. You have to hold it in until you finish. And if you can't do that, you're going to end up losing quality. You're going to end up losing productivity. You're going to end up losing a lot of valuable time. So even if it gets boring or hard or difficult, you really need to focus at one at a time. Once you establish this, you'll slowly realize, oh, when I do finish this and I want to add all these extra features, I'll just put that in my next game. Or I'll do an update when the core game is done. So really just drill on one game at a time. I would heavily suggest, and this depends on the game that you make, but you should really invest in scalable systems. And what this means is so for example, I made a mistake where every enemy that I created in the first version of DodgeKing had their own script, their own class, their own variables. They were literally their own unique objects. And that's an issue because at the end of the day, they behaved identical to all the other enemies. So what happened was if I had a bug in one enemy, then I would have to specifically work really hard to fix that one bug, when in reality, I could have made one game object that did every single enemy behavior. And then all I would have to do was assign a specific variable to say, oh, today I want this flying enemy, right? So then I would spawn that game object, induce the data that says you're a flying enemy. And now all of the systems that I've created for this game object now have the exact same properties as all the other enemies. So scalable systems is basically just saying make one unit, one game object, one of one, and then just use the variables to change how it behaves. Not, oh, let me make this enemy from scratch, and then let me make this enemy from scratch, and then suddenly they have different properties, different rules, different ways how they behave. And it just makes development more hectic because now you have to account for test cases, you have to account for debugging different items. There's a bunch of issues that occur when you have that. So if possible, and if this is part of your scale of your game, one game object, one enemy, and then just variables that changes everything. If you can do that, making more enemies becomes significantly easier, faster, and suddenly you're saving time on the debugging part. This is an interesting point. This may completely depend on where you're at your game development. but I would heavily suggest recycling assets. And there's two reasons why. Number one is sometimes when we create a new asset, it takes a lot of time. So for the example that you can see in the clip, I actually was debating, okay, it would be really cool if I had a way to make sprite art of this robot taking damage, right? So like if I hit it, it does like a little, I don't know, like some type of animation, right? The problem that I realized doing this is that it would take me probably like 2 hours to get it right. And that's being generous because I take a lot of time when I make sprite art. In fact, I'm trying not to make that much sprite art anymore because I want to focus on the system, on the gameplay. But I digress. The whole point that I'm trying to get to is when when I was attempting to make the sprite art for, the enemy getting hit, I realized, whoa, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. And this is for one enemy. I'm gonna have other enemies that I have to, make original hit animations for. When in reality, I already have all the enemies established in the game. So what I did is I actually recycled the same animation for when the enemy attacks. So if you look at the screen for a second, when the enemy is about to attack, he does this little shake and he turns red, and then he attacks. But now when you hit him, he does the same thing. He turns red, he has a little flash, and what I'm doing is I'm using the other systems to indicate hitting. So now he's shaking. Now he has these bursts of stars and little paint coming out, and the camera shakes just a little bit when that happens. So there's other ways to delegate that, and I think that's really important. And the second reason why I mention this is because you have to think about it like this. Back in the SNES days, the NES days, when game development as a whole was very limited, the developers had to use their creativity to indicate or visually show off something that they wanted to do when they may not have the resources to do it. So there might have been recycled animations that you've seen everywhere. I think my favorite example is Mega Man Battle Network, where Mega Man has a bunch of forms, and literally all they did was they just overlaid his sprite, changed his color, added a extra weapon on his hand, and that's it. And they didn't remake it from scratch. They didn't get new artists to make new poses and then new programmers to change how everything behaves. It's just a sprite overlay, sprite color change, extra weapon, and guess what? Going back to the scalable system, just variables that would change Mega Man's behavior. So really, scalable systems, recycled assets are together. You can save so much time with making your game. And then I would also suggest that if you have an artist or somebody that can do other tasks for you, delegate as much as possible. And in concept, this is how a team works. This is just how it is, right? But for example, on the left, you can see this is a draft I made in 20 minutes about how I wanted my logo. And then I got my friend Pun Pun Arts to take the draft, and then she did the professional artwork for it, and this is the game capsule for it. It took her 8 business days. Can you imagine if I had to take 8 business days on my own to attempt to do something that maybe I don't have the skill set to do, but then suddenly that's 8 days I'm not programming, I'm not fixing my game. So this might be obvious, but it's really important to really make sure that you as an individual can delegate as much as possible. If you are a game programmer, which I'm assuming most game developers have to have some level of programming, you should really invest in taking better programming notes. What I mean by this is that most of the time that we have debugging or troubleshooting issues, we're always going back and forth with, is the syntax right? Did I get the right game object? What am I doing to actually fix this bug? And personally, at least for me, and this is why I'm mentioning this, if I were to take notes on exactly what line did what, it would be faster for me to detect what the issue was. Of course, there's going to be the compiler error. You're going to see, for example, on Unity, if you get an error, it tells you, oh, this line is incorrect, go ahead and fix it. But sometimes there's more context that is required to fix that issue. So here on the screen, and this is just a screenshot of a random system that I had that was in charge of making levels. I don't know what fourth or fifth means, and I can see that there's instantaneate, which means we're spawning the fourth friend on this location. Like I can look at it and say, okay, maybe I understand. But for example, if we look at this slide, if I had actually put the notes to genuinely explain what is going on, it would be faster for me to take care of the issue. So let's say I had a bug here, right? Well, look all the way on the top. Oh, this is responsible for low HP effects. Okay, so we have the object pooling. So this is what calls the object. Okay, what's next? Oh, okay, so we have a self-healing code. So this is the line that takes care of that. If I just got in the habit of doing this more often, half of the bugs that I would have had would have been solved way more quickly. So please take notes more carefully on what you're programming so that when you do inspect it again, you're able to fix it more rapidly. Next, we have active and passive feedback loops, right? And what active means is you are required to be there in order to see what's going on feedback wise. And then passive is the input is what you'll be receiving. So let me break that down a bit. If so, in this clip specifically, this is my friend playing the very first prototype I ever made, right? And it's cool because I'm having fun. I'm like, yeah, I'm watching my own project getting played. It's a great experience, right? The problem is I'm sitting down there and I'm basically observing his thoughts, his comments, what he's seeing, what he's missing, and this is great. I'm not saying active feed doing an active playtest is wrong. What I realized though is if I made it passive, if I sent him the demo and then I sent him a survey, then suddenly he can do the demo. And then when he's done, he would go to the survey and answer the questions that I'm specifically asking for, then use his results to fix what I'm actually looking for. Now, I heavily recommend you doing an active playtest on your first couple of times, just to see what your prototype looks like. But after a while, after you have a bunch of development done, after you have a lot of like the game is more polished, there's more features, there should be an automated process to do this. So really consider making a passive playtest mode where players can get your game, whether it's on itch, whether it's through an email, and then also link them a survey so that you can see exactly what they felt, what they went through. And also this gives them the time to really think about what they were going through when they were playing the game. So again, active is good. I'm not saying avoid active, but if there are more opportunities to do passive playtests, then you should definitely invest in that as well, because guess what? Your players will be taking their time to do their stuff while you continue to develop your game. So I discussed this earlier, and it's really important to have large chunks of periods, right? So like if you have the whole morning or the whole afternoon or the whole night off, right? We're talking about 2, 3, maybe 4 hours. If you can find a way to do all the habits I've discussed to generate 4 hours in the night or in the morning, then you will have more time to do focused work. This will allow you to work on your coding. This will allow you to work on the core, on the gameplay loop. These are the most important parts because remember, most important parts of the game are going to be the actual game, not the little menus that show up, not the little side effects. It's what happens in the core of the gameplay loop. And you need to spend your most deep time using using your deep time to get this part done. If you don't have large chunks of work, right, then or rather if you have small periods of time, that's when you would use your time to do the quick tasks. This would be, okay, what art can I fix, what can I delegate, what should I plan out, things that don't require so much deep focus or deep work, but you do need to keep that in mind when you account for that. So remember, the whole reason why we're trying to make as much time as possible is to do more deep work because that's the most important part of your game. There are other parts of your game that are important, which are the small little quick tasks, but that should be delegated to the areas that, require a little bit of time. So when you have those, if you have like a lunch break or something, or, maybe you're about to go out, but you have half an hour before you do, then yeah, go ahead and work on those small little tasks. And then this might also be controversial too, but I think that we have a bunch of tools. I think tools are amazing. I think they're there for a reason. But I also think that we're using tools the wrong way. And what I mean by this is that sometimes we overspend a lot of time using, for example, a GDB or a task manager tool, just planning, just thinking, what should I do next, this and that. And these are valid. These are important. These are things that you should definitely think about and invest. But sometimes we get in this loop where we say, okay, I want my GDD to be this. I want to have my game to have this detail and this and that, and you just have this whole list of things, and you don't know when to stop making the list. You don't know when to iterate. You don't know when to optimize. You just keep adding and adding, and you go back and forth. There's a point where you're wasting time when you're over investing on these tasks, these planning procedures, because you should really be focusing most of your time on making the actual game. And I know I've said that message a billion times already in this video, but I really need you to drill the fact that if you are constantly thinking about new ideas or features, or I need to plan this out before I actually do this, like I said, there is validity behind that. There are things you do want to plan out. There are things that you do want to pay attention to, but you should not spend, days planning every single little detail when you can spend that time actually iterating on the actual game. This is why the deep work part is super important, because let's say you reached an obstacle where you really need to see how a specific level element works, right? And you're testing this level, but then you're testing another version of it, then you're testing a third version of it. That's the time that you spend to do that, not when you plan. Because when you plan it out, you might say, oh, this plan's going to be perfect, this and that, but then it doesn't reach the requirements that you're looking for. Before you know it, you keep reiterating your plan and you don't reiterate with your action. You should focus action first. So, what I'm saying is, there's a bunch of tools, they're great, use them as you want, but really only focus on the tools that you actually need. That would be your programming, that would be your artwork, that would be this, that would be that. Maybe if you need task manager tools because you're managing a team, sure. But if you know that the scope of your game is kind of small, you really don't need this huge, robust way to calculate everything, just work on the action. That's the most important part. Finally, I'm going to end this presentation with the mindset framework. Okay, this is things you should consider when you're actually in the process of making more time, gaining these habits, learning how to develop more efficiently, working on things more quickly. So, number one, and this is the most important thing, please listen to this for a second, because if there's anything in this entire video, it's this. You need to practice drilling. Okay, and what drilling essentially is, and you might have this example here, but have you ever had a bug, an issue, an obstacle, and you're like, okay, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to go ahead and look at the forums, I'm going to look at Reddit, I'm going to look at other tools, I'm going to see how I'm going to fix this, right? And you just can't find a solution. You just end up kind of like you're stuck on it, right? Maybe hours go by, you're working on it and you're like, there's nothing I can do to fix this, right? The issue is if you do not resolve the issue, the obstacle at hand, if you do not resolve that problem right now, your mind is going to create the least passive resistance. So you're going to say, okay, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and work on this other task. And what's the issue with that? You're losing your focus on the actual problem that you have to solve. So what happens is you start delaying this problem over time, and then it becomes a bigger issue to the point where you working on other things makes this problem what we call a band-aid solution. You just kind of leave it in the background, or maybe you kind of do something to kind of delegate the actual problem. Now, this goes back to the breaks, because it is important to take a break, analyze. Like, have you ever taken a shower and then in the shower you're like, oh wait, maybe if I did this, it would work? Yeah. So it is important to take a break. It is important to have those spaces to really think about the problem. But the reason why I'm saying you must drill is because the more time you allow this problem to not be solved, the farther away you're getting from resolving your core gameplay loop. And so if this problem is so fundamental, and if it's affecting the gameplay as a whole, like especially the gameplay loop, the core part of it, you're basically delegating your game's production. And it's so easy to say, "Oh, I have this problem. I'll work on it later. I'll work on something else." But you should really get in the habit of fixing that immediately. And even if you can't fix it immediately, just keep tackling it over and over. Again, take your breaks, think about it, go back, but do not engage on another task until that is done. Otherwise, you're subconsciously making the habit of focusing on other problems instead of the actual most important problem. And when you do this, you're psychologically showing yourself, hey, this is important, but I'm proving to myself that it's not that important. I'll work on it later. I'll focus on something else. And before you know it, you are in the habit of ignoring hard challenges. If you can't take a hard challenge, or if you avoid a hard challenge, you're not going to grow. You're going to have a bunch of mindset switches that kind of like show you how to avoid these issues going forward. And then the next time you find a really hard problem, your brain is going to say, well, I can ignore this. I'll try something else. Work on this, and you will see how much more effective you'll be as a developer. And then over time, when you see a new problem, when you see a new challenge, something very difficult, you're actually going to get excited and say, wait, I know how to deal with this now. Now, I might not know the actual technical answer, but I know I will have the capability, the discipline, the resistance, the ability to sit down and work through this. If you can do that, then suddenly the time that you've been creating to actually deal with this problem is now worth it, because you now know what it takes to actually overcome the obstacle, at least in a mental way. Really important lesson, all right? If you can't drill, if you keep delegating, you're not going to be focused and you're not going to achieve getting the game that you want. So really focus on drilling. I think Masahiro Sakurai did an amazing job talking about internal steam. Basically, as a game marketer, you want to talk about your game, but as a game developer, you really need to stay quiet. And it's such a difficult skill to master, because sometimes we get a new feature, sometimes we see something that works, sometimes we do something really cool, and the first thing we want to do is tell our friends, tell our family, like, oh, I just made the system, now we can do this. Cool. The problem with that, and as Sakurai says, if you share that information, you're going to feel a level of completion. You're going to feel like, oh, I actually completed it, therefore I actually can tell somebody. And suddenly you're not compelled to be hyper focused, hyper productive. You're now kind of like relaxing a bit. So Sakurai basically says the more frustrated you are with like not telling people what you want to, share with what you just did, the more compelled you are, or the more compelled you're going to be to continue surprising them, or to continue like working on things, so that when you do reveal the whole package, it's like way more fulfilling, right? So it's such a minor detail, but it's super important, because I remember talking to my friends about like, oh, I just made the system, it looks cool, whatever. And literally the next 2 days, I'm just lazy. I'm just not working. I'm just not doing what I have to do. I'm just like, oh, I mean, they like it, so I can. And I don't know what it is. It's probably like a subconscious thing. I just don't know. But I really like Sakurai's intent here when he says, hey, internal steam keeps you frustrated, and that frustration compels you to keep working hard on what you have to work on. So if you're marketing your game, absolutely talk about your game, do what you got to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But on a personal level of you communicating to your friend, try to hold that as much as possible, because you will slow down after you share the good news. And lastly, one more important piece that I just cannot skip. If in this entire process, if you are not incrementally improving, you're wasting your time. Learn to work, learn to learn, learn to iterate, do what you have to do, but get better at it. Because the better you get now, the faster your skills will get here. And the better the skill that you have, the more efficient you will become. And the more efficient you become, the more optimized you are over time. And the example that I want to showcase here is on the left. You can see again my very first prototype, right? And the walking system, like the whole grid of like me moving left and right and up and down and this that took me 3 weeks to make. Now, context, I didn't know how to program. This is my first time doing it. Of course, like that's normal stuff, right? But the issue with that is, is it going to take 3 weeks to do this again if I ever wanted to fix it? But then you look at the right. This is literally a year later. And when I made this new grid system where like things move faster and you move up and down, you have directions and this and that, it literally took me 1 day to program all of that. So how did I go from 3 weeks of programming grids to 1 week? Well, I had to learn. I had to question. I had to observe. I had to read the syntax. I had to study. I had to get better at my craft so that I could become a better developer. And the payoff, the consequence to this is the better I get with my skill, the faster I can create my games. So, we can talk about saving time, creating time, your mindset, your ability to, work deep. There's a bunch of tips that I've given here that could probably help you out on making more time for your game to be more productive. But it is critical that you build your craft. If you can't do that, then making games is going to be a very slow process for you. So learn, observe, do what you have to do. But again, get better. If you can't get better, if you can't improve, you're going to be naturally slow. So that's my tips for how to be more productive, for how to create more time, for how to actually just focus on the things that you have to focus on to make your game. Hopefully this video helped you out the way that I hope it did. And as usual, thank you for your time, for allowing me to speak onto this. And just remember that great things come from great decisions. So I really hope that you're able to go ahead and do what you have to do. All right. Now, I promise this, there might be extreme scenarios of like, oh, you should do this, you should avoid that, this and that. But again, be human. Take breaks, do what you have to do. Maybe you are an extremist and maybe you want to like hyper optimize everything, and that's great. Maybe you're a little bit more casual and you're like, okay, I don't want to get too into this, but I do still want to make more time. Then take some of the tips and apply it to the way that you need to. But as usual, I hope this helped, and you guys know what to do if you need anything more.